Welcome to The Explainer. So today we're looking at this really heartwarming narrative called Phil's Story, The Two Buildings. It basically follows a day in the life of a guy named Phil who heads out with his dedicated support team to explore two very different, very old buildings. And what starts out as just a simple day trip, it quickly turns into this incredible look at human behavior, the spaces we inhabit, and honestly, how fast our professional walls can just totally crumble when we're put in the right environment. Okay, let's dive into this. Right off the bat, we're hit with a truly compelling scenario. Phil and his support team show up at their first destination. It's an old building, but with a massive twist. It's been completely converted into an adult playground. I mean, just picture this for a second. You have this team of professional caregivers, right? Their entire job, literally their main focus, is Phil's safety and well-being. They are very much the adults in the room. But suddenly they walk through the doors of this old building and they're completely surrounded by play structures. So what actually happens when strict professional boundaries collide with a space designed purely for childhood joy? Well, as Phil writes, the shift is immediate and entirely infectious. This staff's initial reaction sets up this brilliant thematic conflict. We basically get two wildly different responses to this adult playground. First, we have Haley B., who, as Phil notes, was absolutely mad on health and safety. Her instant reaction is totally anchored in her professional adult responsibilities. She was terrified somebody was going to get hurt. She's looking at this playground strictly through the lens of a caregiver. But then, in total contrast, you have Debbie. Debbie is just swept up in the excitement. She completely bypasses all the health and safety concerns and instantly invites Chris, Haley B., and the rest of the crew to come down the big side with her. This contrast perfectly sets up the tension here, the strict pull of adult responsibility versus that magnetic, totally undeniable urge to just play. Now, what's really interesting about this slide is how the specific physical elements of the building actually dismantled the staff's professional barriers. The environment itself was the catalyst. It wasn't just, a fun room. It was a carefully constructed zone of play. You've got the big slide, which was the initial temptation. Then there's the trampoline, the swinging ropes, and the fireman pole. Each of these things acts as a sort of environmental trigger. They're literally artifacts of childhood. By dropping these professional caregivers into a space dominated by these items, the architecture of this old building gave them unspoken permission to just drop their guard. It really highlights exactly why the staff acted like kids. The environment basically demanded it of them. And what happens when they actually give in to that environment? Pure, unadulterated joy. Phil perfectly captures this moment. Debbie, Chris, and all the other staff totally abandoning their initial caution, leaving all of Haley B's health and safety worries in the dust, go flying down the big slide. Phil just writes that they went, wee down the slide. It's such a simple, funny little word, right? But man, it speaks volumes. It marks the exact second that professional facade just melts away. Phil's support team wasn't just supervising anymore. They were completely engaged, having an absolute blast right alongside him.
And the joy just keeps escalating, turning into this deeply emotional, relatable experience. Just look at this quote about Debbie's reaction to the trampoline. She didn't just take a quick bounce and step off. No, Phil writes, she said she was so excited it was like she was flying. I mean, what a powerful description of uninhibited joy. The physical act of jumping on a trampoline in this old building actually unlocked a profound sense of freedom for her. It grounds those environmental triggers we were just talking about in a very real human experience. It wasn't just physical play. It was a total emotional release from the heavy responsibilities of their everyday adult lives.
By now, the momentum in this playground is just unstoppable. Everywhere you look, the staff is completely immersed in play. While Debbie is feeling like she's flying, the rest of the staff are literally swinging from the ropes. And then there's Chris. Phil notes that Chris was literally crying with laughter while waving Phil over to join him on the fireman pole. Just imagine the scene for a second. Professional caregivers, the people literally in charge of health and safety, brought to actual tears because they are laughing so hard swinging on ropes. It's this beautiful, chaotic picture of joy, and it proves how thoroughly this adult playground rewired their brains. And this brilliantly illustrates just how far back into childhood the staff retreated. As Chris is laughing and making a beeline for the fireman pole, this hilarious little mini-narrative unfolds. Debbie actually pushes Chris out of the way because she wants to go first. She completely throws polite adult etiquette out the window. And why doesn't Chris argue with her? Well, because as Phil so wonderfully puts it, she is tough as old boots. This playful rivalry is just incredible. They aren't acting like colleagues or serious caregivers anymore. They're acting exactly like siblings or schoolyard friends fighting over the best piece of playground equipment.
Which brings us to the absolute core focus of Phil's story. They were like big kids. That's the ultimate takeaway from their time in this first old building. The staff didn't just have a little bit of fun, their entire dynamic completely shifted. The physical environment of the adult playground successfully allowed them to entirely shed their adult inhibitions. The slide, the trampoline, the ropes, they weren't just toys anymore. They were basically permission slips to stop being serious, responsible adults for an afternoon and just embrace the pure, unfiltered fun of being a kid again. Let's move to and see how this builds, because, of course, the day doesn't end at the playground. Phil's support time with his team is wrapping up, and it's time to transition to the next phase of his day, which means meeting up with his gig buddy, Mark. The plan? Head to the second old building of the story, a Weatherspoons pub over in Llandudno. Phil's planning to stay out late with Mark. Now, this transition is absolutely crucial, because we are moving away from this environment of uninhibited childhood play directly into an environment associated with adult socialization and nightlife.
Now watch closely what happens to the staff as this transition occurs. I mean, just a few moments ago, Debbie was shoving Chris out of the way for a fireman pole. But as Phil gets ready to leave for the pub, those professional, cautious boundaries come slamming right back down. Chris and Debbie immediately pivot and tell Phil, don't get into any silly business. Haley B chimes in to remind him that he has to be up early in the morning for his support. And finally, the ultimate adult warning drops, Chris doesn't want you with a hangover. It is a fascinating psychological shift. The second the environment changed from the playground to the prospect of a late night out at a pub, the caregivers snapped right back into their responsible adult roles. But Phil, he takes this sudden return to adult supervision entirely in stride. He just warmly reassures his caregivers, telling them, I will be okay. Mark will make sure I am safe. It's such a lovely, comforting conclusion to his interactions with the staff that day. He acknowledges their care and their professional duty to his health and safety, while still holding on to his independence to go out with his gig buddy. As Phil wraps up his story, he reflects that it was just a truly great day spent with both his support team and his buddy Mark across these two very distinct old buildings. Which leaves us with this final, incredibly important question to ponder. Phil's story brilliantly highlights a duality we all face, right? We all have that inner Haley B focused on the rules, the routines, and making sure we don't end up with a hangover. But we also have that inner Debbie who just wants to feel like she's flying on a trampoline and push to the front of the line for the fireman pole. So, how do you manage that balance in your own life? When was the last time you actually allowed your environment to short-circuit your professional boundaries, shed your adult inhibitions, and just let you be a big kid? Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer. I really hope it inspired you to go find your own big slide today.